All right, we're here to talk to you tonight about forensic psychology, the role of a psychologist within the court system. Can anybody tell me what psychologists do for the court system? I mean, I have 5 fingers. I bet we could come up with 5 things, maybe even 10. Like what? What do psychologists do for the court system? Okay, not everybody at once. What do you think?
They evaluate the ability to stand trial.
They do, and we're going to talk about that. Victim impact. What else?
Jury counsel.
Oh my goodness, you're good. Anything else you can think of off the top of your head? Well, that's pretty much it, so we're done. No, just kidding. Let's get through this, okay? I have 2 videos for you here, too, as well. We're going to get started. So, the first slide that you will see on your paper and on the screen here just kind of says all the different things that psychologists do with the legal system. Part of it, believe it or not, is even things that don't involve criminal cases at all. Accident injury cases, civil cases of people suing each other, police departments hire psychologists, insurance companies hire psychologists. So if you are interested in psychology as a career, or even just to learn more about, there are so many different ways that psychologists work within the legal system. So, believe it or not, there is actually no such thing officially as a licensed forensic psychologist. You become a licensed psychologist by getting a doctorate degree in psychology, a PhD, a PSYD, or an EDD, and then you become licensed by going through the process, usually internships, finishing your dissertation, all of that, and then you sit for the licensure exam. You become a licensed psychologist. Any psychologist that works within the legal system can say, I'm a forensic psychologist because I work within the legal system. Al and I do that in very different capacities, although there's been some overlap in our careers. I've been doing this since 1997, so that's been 25 years now, and I think for you it's a few years longer than that, right?
A few, 1 or 2 years more. People, when I testify in court, they'll say, how long have you been doing this? And I'll say a year less than Dr. Fauci and a few years more than Biden, so it gives away my age without saying it.
So yeah, we've both been doing this for quite a while, different aspects, but yet some overlapping aspects of the forensic world of psychology. Now, there are certificates that you can pay for as a psychologist that will give you a certification, but really, any psychologist who works for the court system in any capacity can say, I'm a forensic psychologist. So, all kinds of different things that we do, like I mentioned, police departments, insurance companies, they get involved in lawsuits. They're not always criminal in nature, sometimes they're civil, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first of all, what you're seeing here, and this is on your PowerPoint presentation page as well, is what goes into an evaluation. One thing that I've learned over the last quarter century, the last 25 years, this is what psychologists can do that other professions can't. Psychologists can do the evaluations. You don't see this with counselors, social workers, psychiatrists, life coaches, all kinds of other people that are in the helping profession nearly as much as you do in psychology. So you type up a report. Anybody remember that teacher you had for English in junior high or high school that would say, pay attention because you're going to need this one day? I hated that. I mean, really. Now, that's what I do. I write reports. Now, I'm not the one who types it. I got to admit that I do have people type these things for me. Same with you, right?
Yeah, for me, I had a learning disability always in spelling. So thank goodness for voice typing, which is what got me through the last 20 years of being able just to dictate it and have it come out on the computer.
And the name Al is pretty easy to spell, too, so that helps. Yeah, so yeah, voice typing, I use an app, and somebody types it for me on the other end of it who gets the secure email. But anyway, there are some psychologists, I'm sure, who type them themselves. So if you're interested in psychology and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I could type an 8 or 10-page report, well, you can have someone type it for you, as long as you pay them, of course. Reason for referral, why is the person being evaluated for you? Is it a criminal case? And if so, is it juvenile or adult? What are the charges? Is it civil, somebody suing somebody else? Observation. Now, this really happened to me. I was speaking in front of about 100 people. They were court employees in Pinal County. Anybody know where that is? About halfway between here and Tucson. I didn't know that a judge was in the audience. She raised her hand and she goes, yes, I'm Judge so-and-so. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I better know my stuff because this is a judge. And she goes, I've read hundreds of your reports, Dr. Silberman. Why do you mention observation? And I said, well, what if the person is like talking to themselves? Or what if they're laughing inappropriately or crying inappropriately? What if I've seen this person before and they've lost or gained a tremendous amount of weight? What caused that within a short period of time? What somebody looks like can be relevant. You don't want to judge somebody based on their appearance, but there can be a lot of relevance to that. Background information and record review kind of goes together because you want to interview that person that you're evaluating, interview anyone else who will talk to you about that person. Reviewing records, that's important too, because that's usually part of your presentation in writing is what's been going on with this person. It's amazing how many records you can get on people these days. I'm looking around the room. For some of you that are students, I might be twice or three times your age. How is there more records about you, if you're under 30, than there are about me and about Al? How is there more records out there now than there used to be?
Technology.
Right. These things are recorded. Back in our day, they used to use this stuff called paper. You've heard of that, right? Yeah. When the paper got old, what did you do with it? Throw it away, shred it, burn it, whatever, yeah. Now that everything is online, it's amazing that these records can be kept for how long? Forever. Now we get into the testing that psychologists are specifically trained to do. IQ testing, educational testing, like academic skills. I want to know, do those two things align? You have a very high IQ, but yet very low academic skills. What happened? You haven't been in school, or you were stoned every day that you were there? Like, what's going on? I want to know what's happening with that person. Also, personality testing. I want to know that too. Some people blatantly lie, and the tests can pick up on that. Sometimes people are more honest on the tests than they are when you interview them. So it's fascinating to see if all those things line up. Next thing, you want to do a DSM diagnosis. Okay, you psychology people, which version of the DSM are we on now? The 5, yep. Now, how about a trickier one? Ready? How come the DSM 1, 2, 3, and 4 used Roman numerals, but the 5 uses the number 5? Anybody know?
Progress.
Progress. There we go. Yeah, they want to be able to update it and be like software. 5.1, 5.2, that's what the goal is. See? You learn something new every day, huh? I just learned that not long ago. I was thinking, wait a minute, why is it the number 5 instead of the Roman numeral? Other things that we do when it's a criminal case, assessment of dangerousness. I don't like that section because I don't want to be the one to predict whether or not you're ever going to do this again. I'd rather err on the side of caution and think if it could happen once, it could happen another time. But still, the courts want to know that in criminal cases. The likelihood of reoffending, is this person not only dangerous, but likely to do this type of crime again? And then, kind of like those English 102 papers, you do have to wrap it up and conclude something. One of my attorney friends, who I've become friends with over the last 25 years doing these things, he joked with me that I could type a 10 or 12 page report, yes, single-spaced, 12-point font, and that he only reads the last page, because all he wants to know is, what am I recommending for his client, defending them? I don't know if you've had conversations with defense attorneys like that too.
Yeah, I've had conversations either with like caseworkers and so forth, and they'll say, you didn't put the diagnosis in. Yes, I did. You just didn't read it.
Yeah, if they just look at the last page. Sometimes too much information. Okay, civil law. This is an area that is much more Al's area than mine. Civil law is when people are suing each other. Instead of a criminal case where you need beyond a reasonable doubt, like 99% certainty, civil law is a preponderance of evidence. It's more likely than not likely that this person injured you or did something, damaged your property or whatever. That means that he or she or that company should owe you some money. And what that is called is a tort. 20 million of them are filed in the United States every year. That's a lot. That's one for every 15 people that's involved in some kind of civil case of suing for money. Now, real quick, I want Al to tell you about this stuff, but we don't need to go through this word for word. You have it in writing, you can read it. You have to prove that not only did this person or this company cause this, but also, we're skipping from 1 to 5, that they did something that is worth money to you, that you should be compensated financially. Maybe they need to buy you something like a new car, but really, that's money if you think about it, right? 2, 3, and 4 is proving that they were negligent and they should have known better. I borrowed this example from a website that is exactly what happened on my son's, my wife Kathy is here too, our son's birthday party when he was what, about 7 or so? We had that lady come with all the snakes and spiders and everything. Yeah, Kathy remembers. She hid in the backyard, but that's another story. Yeah, we had this lady come who had this service where she would bring tarantulas and cockroaches and pythons and wolf spiders and everything and let the kids actually play with them. Can you believe that? I don't know, does that sound appealing to anybody? Anyway, what if one of the kids got injured? Would she be liable? I think so. And so when I saw this example online, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's like my son's birthday party from all those years ago. But I want Al to talk to you just a little bit about those kinds of cases, because that still is psychologists working in the court system.
The one thing that, if some of you are interested in the civil cases, I was unaware when I got into it. Attorney said, do you ever do any of this? I said, no. Before I knew it, had a lot of them. And financially, it pays well because they expect you to charge the same thing the attorneys charge. And attorneys now are charging $250, $300 an hour. So I was just shocked at how lucrative it was. That's not why I went into it. But you get boxes and boxes of records and detailed records. They go way back to someone's high school days, their parents, and so forth. You learn lots of information. And things that I experienced in there, I thought this was just on TV, but it was like one woman who had dystonia, which her hand was frozen because she was in an accident, and she couldn't move it, and the doctors were saying that's exactly what they had. Well, what they did, cleverly, they followed her around for weeks and weeks, and she went into a casino, and they had a camera inside of a briefcase so it wasn't shown, and they had her pulling levels on the slot machines and so forth to show that she was faking, that she didn't have dystonia. And another case I had with another person who had dystonia, she couldn't move her hand and so forth, and they followed her, and she was putting air in her tire and smoking a cigarette at the same time, and supposedly could not move her hand. But people will claim a lot of things. The most common one is post-traumatic stress disorder, that they have these dreams, and post-traumatic stress is a real thing, but people can also exaggerate it by just going online and researching what post-traumatic stress is. So I keep thinking of the accident, I keep thinking of I can't sleep at night, it keeps reoccurring again to me, and of course they want to be compensated for it. I had one case where a woman lost a dog due to an accident, and what they only paid for was the value of the dog. I was surprised. It's not like a human being. So the civil cases involve all kinds of things, from car accidents to personal injuries on work. I've had one guy who had a slip and fall, and the attorney said we put a camera in, and they watched him throw some water down on the floor and then deliberately fell on his back. So it's not easy to get money for personal injury cases when they think you're faking. They will investigate, and they go back far.
So I assume your role as a psychologist in those cases is to determine how much mental stress, anguish, things like that the person really did experience, right?
Exactly. Did they experience stress? They all weren't fake. A lot of them weren't, but can they recover? Will therapy help? And so forth. Did they have some previous problems beforehand? I had one case of a person who got involved in an accident and became bipolar. Could that have caused it? Well, probably not, but bipolar did run in the family, and it did cause it to become early. So
I don't know why. I just need to go back to the dog thing. Like, how do you determine the value of an animal? I think back to that episode of the TV show Seinfeld when George never went to check on his girlfriend's cat, and the cat died, and then he tells everyone, she expects me to buy her a new cat. That was a used cat. It's not worth as much. How do you determine the value of an animal?
I think it was, way back when, it was like no more than $500.
Okay. All right, moving right along. This is also your area. 2 in a row here, child custody cases. You probably know, maybe not, when I teach this in my forensic psychology class, I can't tell you how many students want to participate because this was their childhood, their parents divorcing when they were young, and people know, even without studying this, that there is physical custody, and then there's the legal custody. Who do the kids live with, and who gets to make decisions for them, like school and summer camp and surgery and braces and things like that. I worked as a mediator, not a custody evaluator, where I tried to get parents to agree to a joint stipulation for the judge. And let me tell you something. If these people could agree on anything, they wouldn't be splitting up or divorcing. That was just not something that happened too often. The people were so angry and resentful at each other, we did not get many court cases where people did agree. And that's when they bring in what used to be called a special master, now a family court advisor. I was hoping you could address that a little bit.
Yeah. Like Scott was saying, these are people who can't agree and are in a situation where they can't agree on anything, and they look for reasons to disagree. I remember an attorney once telling me that a couple was fighting over an Instapot, and he said, I charge, at that time, he said $200 an hour. He said they could have bought one for $99, but instead they were fighting it. And when I was doing this, it was one work that my wife, Marcia, was encouraging me to get out of because it's a very negative type thing. People are very hostile. They're hostile toward each other. They go to their parents, they go to their friends, and their parents think that they're wonderful, and the other side's parents and friends think that they're wonderful, and they're angry at you. And I had one time during a Jewish holiday, I had a swastika on my door that said, Jews, Silverman, watch where you're going. Watch where you're going. And eventually I figured out who it was and confronted him. And he said, yeah, I can't get in trouble because I was just worrying about your health. Ha, ha, ha. Ironically, somebody upstairs may have taken care of me because he had a stroke and wasn't able to talk afterwards, about 2-3 weeks later. But that was kind of scary. I would get phone calls, do you know that my ex-husband did not give her breakfast until 11 o'clock in the morning? I want this noted. And they just look for things to fight about. But one thing that stands out in my mind was the judge said that the father says that the mother is continually continually smoking marijuana. This is before it was legal. And she lives in a very small town, and she says, no, it isn't. And when I asked her, I said, what are you smoking? She says, no, I roll my own cigarettes. They look like marijuana. So then I interviewed the children. You always interview the children, part of the custody evaluation. And the judge said, try to find out if you could. And I said, how am I going to find out from a kid who's 3.5? So I'm interviewing the child, and I said, does mommy smoke those cigarettes? Yeah, and she rolls it. She rolls the cigarettes. I said, what color is it? She said, I don't know, brown or green, I don't know. And I don't know why I asked the child this, but I said to her, I said, how do you feel when your mommy smokes those cigarettes? And she said, I like it. And I said, you do? Why? She said, because then she just laughs and laughs and laughs. So I knew then what it was and told that to the judge. But interviewing the children, and there's one other thing with these kind of cases, there was a term called, they don't use it really so much anymore, parent alienation syndrome. There was a book, a couple books written by Richard Gardner, where one of the parents, and in those days it was the mother, because 85% of the cases would go to mothers. Now it's 50-50. So there's as many men doing it as there were women in those days, where one parent alienates the child, saying things like, you know what your father is. You know, your father is. You know your father is not good. And you hear it long enough and hard enough, you eventually start to believe it after hearing it. So that's parent alienation syndrome, and that was very tough to break. I remember one case that I was involved with where, I'll just mention this part, the father, this is many, many years ago, the father was a physician, and the two teenage girls said, you didn't leave mom with any money, mom doesn't have money to do things with us, and you didn't give her any money. And the father just said, can the children go out? And he said to me, I left her money, can I tell them? And I said, well, yeah, you're allowed to defend yourself. And he said, kids, he said, I want to tell you, your mother isn't being quite upfront with you. I left your mother $500,000. And the next week when they came back, they confronted mother, and she said, oh yeah, he did that, but that was because that's from our retirement. I don't consider that money, $500,000, and which today would be about $1 million. So it was a very rough area to deal with because of the lies and the people hating each other, but you have to evaluate who's the better parent, who will allow the other parent to have visitation, who's not alienating the other parent, and so forth.
So the two things you see in bold here is what I used to do and what Al used to do. I was a mediator. I was not there to evaluate or to make a decision, but in your role, what used to be called special master, now forensic family court advisor, you were making decisions, recommending things.
Yeah, recommending it, and I'd always say to the people, so they didn't come after me with a gun or something, I don't make the final decision, I just make a recommendation. The judge will make the final decision.
You have to have thick skin for that kind of forensic psychology. Next type, police psychology. 90% of police departments have psychologists, but most of them are not full-time. You work part-time by the hour most of the time. The most common thing is to evaluate fitness for duty. What not only should a person work for the police department, but in what capacity? Should they be on the streets? Should they be in an office? Should they be part of a SWAT team? Things like that. Now, if you're doing this kind of psychology, you can't become friends with the officers because you're making recommendations about them. So it is a weird kind of psychology to be in a forensic capacity, because you get to know these people, but you can't get too close to them because you're making recommendations about all kinds of different aspects of their careers. So obviously people take that personally if they feel one way and your recommendation is different. Correctional psychology, this is my background. I worked for a few years in the prison system. A couple of facilities that don't exist anymore, but also some that do, like Florence and Perryville. I worked mostly with women, but I did some on the men's side. I've worked in juvenile corrections as well. You tell me, maybe you've read the slide already, maybe not, just off the top of your head, what would be the pros and the cons of working as a psychologist in a prison? The good and the bad. A large N, plenty of people to evaluate. You never run out of work. What else would be good and bad? You know where to find them, exactly. Anything else, the good or the bad? A lot of manipulation. I worked in a women's prison in Phoenix called Arizona Center for Women. It doesn't exist anymore. It was common that they'd be like, I'm so depressed today. Can you get me out of the dishwashing duty that I was signed up for? No, that's not my role here. I'm sorry. So a lot of manipulation. Long hours, you can't just leave whenever you feel like it because a lot of times there's a lockdown or there's something you need to do. So I'm kind of fortunate I did that before I had children because otherwise I can't imagine like, oh, I'm sorry, I'll pick you up at 7 from school. Well, school's over at 2:30. You can't just show up whenever you want to. So yeah, the long hours. One good thing about it, prison psychologists do get paid fairly well. The benefits are pretty decent. The insurance, the paid days off, all those things were pretty nice. Also, it was job security. I never felt like they weren't going to need me. In fact, they needed more of me than just me because there is, like you said, you see everything in society within a prison that you would see on the outside, just more of it. So yeah, the job security was definitely there. Trial consultation, expert witnessing. This is your area.
Yeah, for expert witnessing, when you go to trial, the attorneys will ask you what you think about the person. Will the jury find them the same way you do, what they should present, and so forth. So going to trial was something I did a lot of. And there's all kinds of different trials. The one that's the most efficiency is the federal courts. They start on time, they end on time, they take you. Well, a lot of other cases that I've worked on, you're sitting outside waiting, and then it's dismissed, or there's plea bargains and so forth.
Did you ever get involved in witness preparation or the debriefing afterwards?
The debriefing, but not witness preparation. I never did that.
Okay. Or the defendant, making the defendant appear one way or another with the attorney?
The attorney I worked for on a big murder case, which, yeah, I'm just talking about what they did with him to prepare him. They had him have a nice haircut. They had him dress up well with a suit and hide his tattoos and so forth.
Yeah, but they consult you and say what will make this person look good, and yeah. See? All kinds of things. When the trial is over, there's something called debriefing. Military uses this. Police use this. After an event is over, you talk about it, you process it, maybe even file a report. Psychologists get involved in that too when it comes to criminal and civil cases. Now, juvenile delinquency. Al did this for decades. I've been doing this now for 22 years. I started in 2000, so it's always easy for me to count forward how many years I've been doing it and count backwards how many years I've been doing it as well. Did you know in the state of Arizona you cannot be arrested for anything you do unless you are at least 8 years old? It's true. If you do something when you're 6 or 7, you could be taken from your parents, but not actually arrested. By the time you're 18, you're an adult, you're not a juvenile anymore. So the juvenile court is between 8 and 18. Only 3%, but in Arizona, it's a little over 3.5%, so we could say closer to 4% of kids in that age range get arrested. But let me add something to that. Only 3 or 4% get arrested, but they all know each other. I've been doing these forever, and kids will be like, oh, you're that Dr. Silberman. Yeah, you saw my cousin and my brother, and you saw my mom 20 years ago. It's like, really? It's amazing. Birds of a feather flock together. You've probably heard that expression. So I do juvenile court evaluations. I've done a few thousand of them. You have as well.
Yeah, one kind of funny story real quickly was a boy, he was about 11, and he was robbing mailboxes just for the heck of it. He didn't, he would open them, see if there was money and so forth. And the mother said, I want him scared. You have to really scare him as much as you can. So the detective came in and sat him down, and he read the child the Miranda rights. And the child looked at the detective and said, wow, can I have that for show and tell?
Hey, so you can get arrested at a young age. I had an 8-year-old that at school, the teacher told the kid on the playground to go sit in the corner, and he picked up a big rock and hit her in the nose with it. She was screaming, blood was flying everywhere. They called the police, and this kid was arrested. So he wasn't actually put in jail, but when I saw him at the court building for his evaluation, his mother had to bring him the next day, I had to go through all the tests with him. And when it comes to the drugs, the mom was like, don't even ask him. I said, I have to, it's part of my job. Do you use marijuana? And he goes, no, that's bad. And I said, what about cocaine or coke? And he goes, so, well, we're not in school, you don't have to raise your hand. And he goes, well, I do like cherry Coke. So no, that's not what we're talking about, but okay. Yeah, the little kids, it's kind of sad because they're getting themselves into that lifestyle, and a lot of times they don't even understand it. Little trigger warning, our videos address violent crime, and so do the slides here. So if it's not something that's comfortable for you to hear about, watch, or talk about, then I could totally understand if you don't want to be part of this discussion. That's totally fine. But when someone is killed, the first question that any good law enforcement officer should ask, who would want that person dead? Was it random? That's pretty rare. 9 out of 10 times, somebody wants that person dead. And then they have to narrow it down, who would it be that would want this to happen to another person? When someone is killing more than one person, there's a reason behind that too. There are mass murderers who go into a place and shoot a bunch of people. They're usually trying to make a statement. They don't expect to leave alive. They expect to either kill themselves or be killed by the police. There are spree killers who go to different places to kill people, and they have specific motives for that too. And then there are serial killers. FBI profilers, we're going to talk about that in a minute, refer to them as sharks, circling their prey before they go in for the kill. They are the most intelligent, and they seem the most normal, and serial killers are scary people because we don't know who they are until they get caught. That's the next slide, explaining those 3 things. We have videos for you about this in just a minute here. Real quickly, I don't want to read word for word. Even if you've never committed a crime in Arizona, there are 4 statutes under Section 36-501, I almost said that backwards, where somebody can be locked up against their will. Is there proof that you're dangerous to yourself or others? Are you not able to sufficiently care for yourself? And are you a person who help needs to be forced on through medication or therapy? And they often bring in psychologists to do those assessments. Anything you've been involved in like that?
Not really, not as much. Yeah.
We're no hope at all. I don't do assessment of dangerousness. A lot of times this happens at hospitals or other locked facilities. Sometimes you visit someone's home to do this, but that's one area of psychology that I don't personally have a background in. All right, competency. In order to go to trial, there needs to be evidence that you can assist your attorney and help defend yourself. So we have a couple of videos to show you. I don't want to get into this too much, but if somebody is not competent, the judge wants to know, can this person become competent? What about if we medicate them or give them counseling or education about the court system? You tell me. 5 fingers again, I can think of 5 reasons. Why would a person not be competent and not able to understand or assist an attorney? That person would be? Yeah, some kind of severe psychological disorder like schizophrenia, bipolar, something like that. What could another reason be?
Learning disability.
Learning disability, low functioning, or just a learning disability in general. The 2 examples that Al and I just gave, young children, right? A lot of times they don't know if, oh, you know what, if you admit guilt, then you kind of lost your chance of having a court hearing because you already admitted you did it. So yeah, young children a lot of times just are not competent, and maybe they can't be within the time allowed by statute, which is 7 months for a child or 24 months for an adult to get competent. Elderly people with Alzheimer's, they might not be seen as competent. If you're not competent, the judge wants to know, can you be? And if not, the case would be dropped. The judge could still make you go to a mental hospital, but they can also just drop the case. All right, that's on the next slide. So, insanity, a totally different topic. You don't know what you're doing, you don't know that it was wrong, you can't control your behavior, insanity. I had one and only one out of a few thousand juvenile court cases where the girl, 15 years old, was deemed to be insane at the time of the crime. What did she do? Nothing horrible. She walked from her house in Casa Grande to a grocery store and started ripping open packages, potato chips, raw meat, eggs, milk, and just throwing things all over the place and screaming. She was having a severe manic episode. By the time I saw her, she wasn't like that, but she sure was on the day in question, temporary insanity. Well, guess what? The law has changed in Arizona. Before 1996, it used to be not guilty by reason of insanity. What are the first two words? Not guilty. The charges are dropped. But since 1996, it's called GEI, guilty except insane. So you can still go to trial, you can still be sentenced. I worked with and met the very first defendant under the new law. It was January of 1996. And he was baffled that he was insane. He was, mentally ill, and they still sentenced him to prison anyway. He got put in the state mental hospital for a while, but then back to prison. So the law has changed. Criminal profiling. This is going to be our first of two videos. John Douglas is the one who started this for the FBI in 1978. The first case was a year later in 1979. He describes it as mixing criminal justice and psychology into a blender and pushing start. Because you have to know the human mind, you have to know criminal justice. And John Douglas has a master's degree in psychology and has written several books on this topic. He talks about a modus operandi, or an MO. How did the person commit the crime? The signature. What did they do that was uniquely you, him or her? We had a case at ChandlerGilbert where I teach about 20 years ago. These overhead projectors, for the screens, were disappearing. We had a police detective come, this was in the very early 2000s, who had been through a profiling class 2 weeks long in Washington, D.C., and he told us, after interviewing people for 2 days and typing up a report, this is an employee. Not only that, it's a young employee, somebody under 30. Not only that, it's a male. Not only that, he works in technology. Really? It turned out to be true. They ended up going on eBay, which was new back then, and finding one of our employees selling those overhead projectors. Was that a smart thing to do? No. How did he know? It was the signature specifically. These things were disappearing, and the wires were being carefully laid out on tables or desks. Somebody clearly knew what they were doing with the technology. If anybody tried to sell me one of those, I wouldn't even know what to do with it. I don't know about you, but yeah, this was clearly somebody who knew what they were doing. The FBI trains police departments now how to profile cases, what exactly they should be looking for. They have about a 90% success rate. A lot of times it's brilliant. I want to show you a few minutes of a video about how all this started. So again, trigger warning, if this stuff is disturbing to you, feel free not to watch. It's totally fine.
Killers leave all kinds of evidence behind. Hair, clothing fibers, sometimes even weapons. But there are other kinds of evidence, signs of a criminal mind at work.
What I've always said was to understand the artist, you must look at the artwork.
It's called profiling, using research from convicted murderers and crime scene evidence to create a portrait of a killer.
Anyone can make the arrest, but I'm wanting to know really what makes them tick.
A common sense approach to detective work whose results can seem magical.
It was just an uncanny prediction. It turned out to be exactly correct. It's like the FBI people were on the other side watching this crime as it was occurring.
Georgia, between January 1979 and May 1981, more than 200 murders occurred in and around the city. But the most troubling of these crimes were the mysterious deaths of 28 children and teenagers. It would be the nation's first major test of criminal profiling. July 28, 1979, police responded to a comptroller order in a wooded area off Niskey Lake Road in Atlanta's predominantly black Eastport section. Upon arrival, they found the body of 13-year-old Alfred Evans, who had been missing for 3 days. 150 feet away, police also discovered the partially decomposed body of 14-year-old Edward Smith, who had been reported missing for a week. Coroner's reports indicated that Evans had been strangled and that Smith had been shot with a .22 caliber weapon. Searching for suspects and information, police combed the housing projects where both Smith and Evans lived. They came up empty. 2 months later, 9-year-old Yusuf Bell, also from Atlanta's southwest side, was sent to the corner store near his home. He never arrived. On November 8th, police found Bell's body inside a classroom at an abandoned school. The boy had been strangled. Police still had no suspects, and not enough evidence to link the crimes to one another. 5 months later, 9-year-old Jeffrey Mathis was sent with $1 to a nearby gas station where he was to buy cigarettes for his mother and return immediately home. An hour passed. 2 hours passed. Jeffrey's mother began to worry. Late that evening, she called the police and reported her youngest son missing. Just a few days earlier, she had warned him against speaking to strangers.
And he said, Mama said, I don't talk to strangers. I don't go to cars.
On April 15th, Mathis and Camille Bell announced they were banding together to publicize the murders of black children in Atlanta.
We are frustrated and we are frightened.
Over the next 2 months, 5 more victims were claimed. All young black children, all from poor neighborhoods. In mid-July, Mayor Maynard Jackson and Public Safety Commissioner Lee Brown announced the formation of a task force to investigate the possibility of a connection among the murders. The task force included the FBI. The murders presented the FBI with a unique opportunity to utilize a new and controversial investigative technique, criminal profiling. Special Agents John Douglas and Roy Hazelwood were dispatched to Atlanta. Their task, create a profile of the killer. Quickly, both agents established one likely fact about the unknown suspect.
I knew at that point in time that we were probably dealing with a black male, someone that could move comfortably through that environment without attracting attention.
For the special agent who had pioneered criminal profiling, this was the first chance to legitimize the technique as a valid investigative tool.
It was tough. There was a lot of pressure because had I screwed up that analysis, the whole program could have went down the drain.
Working out of the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, Douglas had made a name for himself by conducting field research on serial killers. Research that would one day become the basis for the film Silence of the Lambs.
We go into the penitentiaries at nighttime and interview the subjects, and much to our surprise, they were very anxious to talk to us.
Over a 5-year period, Douglas and a colleague interviewed more than 30 of the country's most notorious serial killers, including Richard Speck, Charles Manson, and David Son of Sam Berkowitz. Much of the questioning focused on each criminal's family life, childhood, and teenage years, looking for patterns of behavior and background. By the time Douglas and his colleague Roy Hazelwood got to Atlanta, the number of victims had risen to 16. From the beginning, Douglas was careful to tell the Atlanta police and task force officials that his profile would not solve the case by itself.
What I say is, I'm only offering you one little piece in the puzzle. I am not going to solve the case. You're going to solve the case. You got to do the hard work.
Both profilers visited the crime scenes of Evans, Smith, Milton Harvey, and victims Christopher Richardson and Earl Terrell.
All right, let's talk about this a minute, because I have another video for you and another PowerPoint slide. In this case, let's get the uncomfortable part out of the way. How did they know the perpetrator would be black? And by the way, serial killers are rarely black. It's usually a white guy thing to do. What do you think?
Criminals like serial killers rarely cross racial.
Exactly.
So,
This was almost an exclusively black neighborhood where these kids were disappearing from. So as much as people didn't want to hear it at the time, they're like, no, this is a rare case that it's going to be a black man because these kids are being strangled a lot. And yes, women can strangle people. I'm sure that's true, but this is a guy thing. Not only that, it's a black guy thing, and it's a young black guy thing. And not only that, how do you get 26 kids to get in a car with you? It's going to be somebody that the kids think is an undercover police officer. Well, when they started to look at this, anybody know who was this serial killer? Anybody know the name? Do you have all your serial killers memorized? Wayne Williams, one of the rare cases of an African-American serial killer. It's usually a white guy thing to do. It's almost always a male thing to do, by the way. But in this case, they narrowed it down, and the police started saying to the kids in that neighborhood, do you know anybody who's like under 30 and black and lives around here and is an undercover cop? Oh yeah, Wayne Williams. Well, he's the one who was convicted of it. He only got convicted of 4 of the murders. The other 22, they didn't need to prove because he got life in prison without parole. Now, in the case of the ChandlerGilbert situation, the disappearing things, why did they know it was male? Somebody was taking those things off the ceiling. Now, women can be strong too, I understand that, but it just seemed like a guy thing to do, and it was. It was an employee in our technology department 2 decades ago. See, if you know the criminal mind, you can figure these things out. Well, the FBI is right 9 out of 10 times, but they do get it wrong sometimes. The Washington, D.C. sniper case from maybe 20 years ago, the early 2000s, they thought it was a middle-aged white man who was angry at society. Turned out not to be true. It was an older man and a younger man doing these things together. Well, another one that they were not right about was the Temple murders case in Arizona. Waddell, which is a western suburb of Phoenix, 9 Buddhist monks were killed all at the same time. The next morning, somebody came to deliver them food, and they were all dead. And right away, the FBI came in, and they thought it was a racial thing against either Buddhists or people of the particular faith and what they believed in, or maybe even people from Thailand, because that's where these monks were from originally. The government of Thailand even got involved, and that turned out not to be the case. I want to show you a few minutes of this video.
Temple in Waddell, Arizona is home to peaceful Thai monks. However, the serenity of this night will be interrupted by a most heinous crime. Over the course of the next year, these 9 murders will lead to 5 false confessions, 18 life sentences, and lawsuits costing the taxpayers of Maricopa County millions of dollars. This resulted in a modification to investigative procedure and an election result with countywide, statewide, and nationwide consequences. The next morning, 2 helpers came to the temple, Wakam Kinwan, to provide food for the monks. They discovered the 9 victims dead on the floor of the living room. The women fled the temple and called the police. The police would come to discover the worst mass murder in Arizona history. An attack which was carried out with military precision, leaving behind very little evidence. The victims were the abbot of the temple, 5 monks, a nun, her nephew, who was a novice monk, and a temple employee. They were positioned in a circle, forced to the ground, and shot with a .22 caliber rifle and a 20-gauge shotgun. Evidence at the crime scene included the word bloods carved into a wall, ransacked rooms, stolen AV equipment, and blueprints. The circumstances of this event made police have to consider a variety of motives, including robbery, gang violence, and the possibility of a hate crime. Meanwhile, the current sheriff of Maricopa County, Tom Agnos, was recovering from reconstructive heart surgery. The investigators lacked direction and leadership. A special task force was assigned to the case, following hundreds of leads that would go nowhere, many of which came from a tip line open to the public. After experiencing weeks of pressure from local, national, and international entities, the task force received the first real break in the case on September 10th. 2 new leads were introduced that day, which were logged as numbers 510 and 511. And in the words of Gary L. Stewart, one of them would break the case and the other would break the task force itself. 510 was a .22 caliber Marlin rifle that was taken from the 17-year-old named Rolando Cortechea during a routine traffic stop, as it had matched the description of the murder weapon police were searching for. This was one of many .22 caliber rifles that had been confiscated as part of the investigation. So far, out of all the rifles already confiscated and tested, none had matched.
This was such a big deal, the FBI got involved in this. Their profile thought it was a racial hate crime, maybe against Buddhists, maybe against monks, maybe against people of Asian descent. As you saw in the video, these were men from Thailand. There were a couple others who were killed, but that's largely what it was. Well, this was such a big deal, international news, that they brought in the big guns. I mean, expensive attorneys, world-renowned people who could testify, who could help figure it out. They even hired a well-known forensic psychologist who, I think you know him. Was it you? Yes.
I did not testify in this case because I felt, without mentioning too much, that one of the people was definitely guilty, in my view, and I was hired by the defense part. And I said, there's no way I can testify ethically because I don't believe that this particular person was innocent. And what it was two teenagers who thought there was gold that the Buddhist monks had in their temple, and they had been to the temple. They were of Asian descent, one of them anyway. And they were there to steal the gold. And they talked about how they put them in a circle and shot them, and there was no resistance, which is typical of Buddhist monks. It was almost like a game as I was listening to what they said. So the defense hired you to evaluate one of those two kids and was thinking, oh, well, of course you'll testify because you'll say that he isn't the type of kid that would do this, but he was a nice kid. He really never had any trouble before. I mean, a couple of skirmishes here or there, but was not what you would typically expect. See, profiles can be wrong. FBI gets it right 9 out of 10 times. Not in that case. We want to conclude with any questions, comments, anything that you want to say or you're interested in, or anything at all?
Yeah, I was actually curious about the time that you spent as a psychologist with prisoners. Were you ever, was any of that rehabilitation post-prison or anything, or is that another psychologist?
Yeah, you're right. That's a different kind of forensic psychology. I actually worked in the units. My wife is back here. She can attest to that she would say, are you ever afraid of them? I'm like, no, I'm afraid that they're going to want to come live with us because these were like lonely, desperate people. Some of them being in prison was better for them than their lives were outside. That's a sad state of affairs. So yeah, I worked in the facilities. And let me tell you something. I used to tell everyone it would take me an hour to get to this prison in Phoenix. It would take me an hour to get out of it, too, because of all the security you have to go through. So that's another tough thing about working in a prison system. But yeah, once they're out and they're being rehabilitated, taking college classes, getting job training, that was a different angle of it. One thing that I can tell you is we had a facility in the prison, this is not exactly what you were asking, to teach them about jobs that they could have when they got out. And we actually had one of those call centers. So sometimes people call you and say, do you want an extended warranty on your car? What about your carpets? Do you need them to be cleaned? That might be a prisoner calling you and taking your credit card number. Isn't that crazy? That's what we used to do there. And there was job training like that on the inside, and then after they got released, on the outside. What else can I?
One of the things for me, just sometimes with going into prisons that always got to me, I still can hear it, is the clinging of those big doors. You know, you go into the first door and it closes behind you, then you go into another area and it closes behind you until you get to the main room, and I just can hear that clinging.
What else do you want to talk about or ask about? Anything? Yeah.
What was your favorite job as a psychologist?
Not the divorce stuff, I'll tell you that much. I really like the juveniles that I see now because I really think there's hope for children to change. A lot of times kids do dumb things, they do careless things, they do impulsive things. So I really like working with the juveniles, and it's always nice when later on, I told you it's sad when I see like a younger sibling or something, to find out that they've turned their lives around. They go to college, they work full time. So I like that hope of younger people to see that they can get out of that lifestyle.
Yeah, today I work only 1 day a week and by video, and I had 3 cases today, and they were almost typical of all the cases I see. All of the mothers lost their children. These were all women to this case. One, the boyfriend was abusing her daughter. The daughter told the mother about it. She didn't believe the daughter until she decided to put a camera hidden in the room and saw that it was true, but she lost the children and has to go through therapy. Another one was due to drug use. She was neglecting her children. She was on the streets, panhandling, and was into meth. A third one was for physical abuse. She believed that it was her religion that she was allowed to beat her children. So you evaluate these people, you see the probability of whether or not they will be doing this again, whether they learned or whether they can be rehabilitated. DCS goes out of its way to make sure that people at least get the right to be rehabilitated, even if it doesn't take.
What else? Yeah.
So doing what you guys do you think it has affected you guys outside of the job, like for
Absolutely for me. I have 2 kids, and when they were younger, I was so overprotective over my daughter, and she's 3 years younger than my son, and I remember one time she wanted to walk to a friend's house, and I'm like, no, I'm driving you. I work too much in the criminal justice system, and she looked at her brother, and she goes, but you let him walk to friends' houses, and I'm a lot more mature than he is. I said, yeah, you're right, but seeing too much of this stuff really taints you.
Yeah, I think one of the things, someone once said, how could you go to sleep after you deal with somebody who's committed horrible crimes or beat their wife or so forth? And the answer is that when you do one, it stays in your mind and may be hard for you to go to sleep. But if you're doing 5 or 6 in a week or 10 a week, sometimes even 15 a week, it all blends into one. It doesn't really affect you as much as if you saw just one person who went through hell.
What else? Yeah.
So in the Buddhist temple massacre, you said the defendant was a very nice kid. What was it about him in your interview with him that made you so confident that he was guilty?
He practically almost admitted it with it, but he was very nice. He said, Dr. Silverman, if you're afraid of me, I could have them put back on the handcuffs again and the leg braces. I said, no. I said, so-and-so, you seem like a really nice guy, and he was. He never got into trouble before.
And those 2, did anybody heard of that case, like other than what we just showed you? You're familiar with it? Okay, because, let's be honest, a lot of you weren't around in 1991, right? It was 31 years ago. But that was huge news back then. Worldwide news, and it happened, unfortunately, right here in Arizona. But those 2 kids are now middle-aged men, and they're still in prison, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. There was a hearing recently about whether they needed a new trial and stuff like that. It came up like decades later, but they're still locked up.
They did get a new trial and still were found guilty. Lady in the back there.
Can I go back to the insanity king thing?
Yes.
So you said that they service part of it in the mental hospital now, but they also go back to jail. Is that like part of their sentence, or is it like an intermission?
Smart question. Yes, it's part of their sentence. And our hospital, the Arizona State Hospital, anybody know where that's located? 24th and Van Buren. I won't ask you how you know that neighborhood, but that's okay. That is a very sketchy area of town. That's where our state mental hospital is located. And yeah, if you are sentenced to 10 years and the judge finds that you're mentally ill, that's a locked facility. You could start your sentence there. When your symptoms get better, you can go to prison. You got mentally ill again, you can go back to that hospital. It counts as part of your sentence. That's a very good question.
What constitutes a serial killer? Because I've heard if they kill 3+ people.
Exactly.
5+, is it 3?
Yeah, usually the definition by the FBI is 3 people in separate incidents. And it's like a game to them. They're like hunters. These are the most normal-looking, acting people. You should be scared of them. We don't know who our neighbors are. And there's a triad. This isn't always true, but when you look at the backgrounds of serial killers, they often did mean things to younger children or animals when they were younger. They set fires. They wet the bed at an age that was inappropriate, 8, 10, 12 years old. So there is a profile for what usually makes up a serial killer, whereas mass shooters, and Al's the one who gave you that news article there, they almost always are white men who have really bad problems with women. They just hate women, they don't get along with women, they resent women. So I appreciate you finding that article because it's very true.
Yeah. There was a case of someone in Las Vegas, a murder, that a man was found drowned in a bathtub in milk, and someone put bananas in the bathtub with the milk and cornflakes, and the police know it's a serial killer. All right, that was a dad joke. Yeah. Yes. When you're in graduate school, by the way, I just had somebody tell me today, oh, that's so many years of school. It's school that you like after a while. You get done with all those requirements, and it's stuff that you actually like and enjoy doing. When you start doing internships, pick court-related things, whether it's a probation office or a prison or a jail, because that's what I did. And then that made it a lot easier for me to get jobs doing that after the fact. I can't tell you how many of my classmates wanted to do all their internships in college counseling centers. So then you get people who have trouble studying or breaking up with a boyfriend or eating disorders. Of course those are important things, but it's not going to result in a job doing forensics. Does that make sense? That's what I think. By the way, just for those of you who are students, that I found, and the same is true today, that the higher up you go, the more interesting it is. That after you get through, especially in graduate school, it's, yeah, you got a lot more work to do in paperwork, but it's so much more interesting. I hate to say the word fun, because it's work, but it is more fun.
Why do they think that, serial killers are men? Why do they think women?
I think it's a brilliant question, and I wish I had a brilliant answer.
Because it usually is men. You don't hear about many, I think, what is it, 5 female serial killers?
Right, out of hundreds. The movie Monster was about that. About Eileen Wuornos, one of the rare female serial killers. Yeah, what is it about us men that make us do these kinds of things? Ladies? Testosterone, yeah. Socialization.
Women have more specific motives, especially if they're to commit serial crimes. Men tend to have a broader spectrum of them. So for men, they might kill because they're sexual sadists, or they might kill because they're just pissed off. Where women will kill specifically for revenge is one of the top ones, or to get ahead, power-wise. So it's very specific, and that's typically why there's less female serial.
Yeah, I mean that totally makes sense. And, it's a guy thing to do. Serial killers and mass killers and spree killers. It's more of a male thing.
And one other thing, psychologically, we say that when women are depressed, they go in and they get sad. And when men are depressed, they go out and they do vicious things and they get angry and get into fights. That's why there's so many more men criminals.
Is it serial killer percentage of the population? Is it the same worldwide, or do we have more serial killers in the US?
Yeah, it's much more of an American thing. It's unfortunately true. Yes, there are some in other countries. There's a well-known case in Japan, another one in Australia, but it is a white male, middle-aged to young middle-aged American thing, unfortunately, for serial killers. Jack the Ripper in England is rare. That's just not a common thing. That is a good question, because these things do weigh on you, and it becomes part of you, and you really just have to know when to ask for help and who you can lean on, whether it's family or whether you need professional help yourself, and if this is really what you're cut out for. Kind of interesting to hear Al say that about the custody cases. I got out of the mediation for the same reason. It wasn't so much the serial killers as the husbands and wives who were divorcing and people dating each other who had a baby together that was driving me crazy. So you have to know yourself. For some people, it would be dealing with the murder and violence, and for other people, it would be all the yelling and screaming of people in your office who, are fighting over their kids, who have done nothing wrong to deserve that. So yeah, you do have to know yourself, and you have to take care of yourself.
And know when to get out, like the field for both of us in custody type cases.
Yeah, Wayne Williams strangled more than he shot or stabbed, and it's usually a gun thing. But of course, in mass shootings, well, it has the word shooting in it. It's rare to mass kill somebody with a knife. The other people would be able to get away, or with a rope or something. But yeah, the availability of weapons, and it's not exactly clear why this is such an American thing. Is it the TV that we watch, the movies? Is that a reflection of what's already happening in society, or is it causing what's happening in society? There are just no brilliant answers to these deep questions, but they're good questions. The algorithms that are used to see what you've looked up, what kinds of things you're interested in, and stuff like that, they're not always accurate. And so, side note, I'm getting a lot more cases than ever before with the juvenile court of kids that put inappropriate things on social media. Blowing something up does not always imply violence. I just learned that maybe 5 years ago. If you're a teenager or a young adult, what else could it mean?
The bathroom.
Yeah, and it could mean somebody calling you too much, and it could mean a bunch of things. So yeah, you put that into an algorithm and determine, that's the person who did it. Maybe that's not what was intended in the first place. There's so much to learn, and things keep changing. And as you get older, you have to kind of keep up with all the new stuff.
When y'all are interviewing the inmates, how heavily guarded are you? Like, are there guards in the room? Are they just outside of the door? Or is there no one?
When I do these juvenile cases, there's usually 3 or 4 outside the room. And if the kid is really volatile or is getting in trouble in the detention facility, they will ask me if I want somebody in the room with me. Usually I say no, but once in a while I'm like, yeah, why don't you come in here with me? But kind of like John Douglas said, it's amazing what these people want to talk to you about after they've been caught. If I were to see them on a street corner, they wouldn't admit this stuff to me, but once they're in there, it's amazing the kinds of things they want to talk about.
Do you think it's interesting how a lot of the juveniles, kind of know each other? Do you think there's anything kind of behind that?
What I think is behind that is the neighborhoods, and I hate to say that because there's plenty of, crime and drugs and everything in nice neighborhoods, but I could point to areas of any city and say, I have seen so many kids from this area, that area, this area, and unfortunately it's lower socioeconomics that is usually behind it because you get desperate and you're on the streets, and if you have parents at all, they're probably working 2 or 3 jobs. One of the first times my daughter drove by herself was to the one and only drive-in movie theater in the state of Arizona, in Glendale. And we were in Phoenix anyway, and she was driving there with a couple of friends, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I know exactly that neighborhood, 67th Avenue in Bethany, do not get out of the car until you're in that drive-in movie theater area, because I know that neighborhood a little too well. So yeah, a lot of times it's, socially disadvantaged neighborhoods, and that's why they know each other. On a slightly related note, I got an email saying, you are being asked to be part of a judge's inquest. The first thing I did was ask Siri, what's an inquest? What? All these years, I've never been asked to do that. It was 3 judges that wanted my opinion on a case just like you're talking about, because they didn't want to make that mistake either. They don't want to hold someone in jail longer than necessary if the person doesn't need to be in there, but who on earth wants to be responsible for letting someone out and then having someone act out like that and do something violent? So yeah, I learned a new word. I once had a female flight attendant who was arrested because she was keeping the empty bottles from alcohol from her flights instead of disposing of them like she was supposed to, and then she would go to Costco and get the big lifetime supply of vodka or bourbon or whatever and fill up those little bottles and bring them back to work with her. Well, the airline was wondering, gee, we're not selling much alcohol in her flights. They ended up doing, like you said, hidden camera and finding out that this lady was bringing in her own alcohol to sell. I don't know if any of you fly and, an airline, they don't do it because of COVID as much as they used to, but those little alcohol bottles are expensive on airplanes, aren't they? Yeah, and you can go to Costco and get like the 2-gallon one for the same price. That lady was brilliant. And when I saw her at Arizona Center for Women, which doesn't exist anymore, just like you're saying, she was such a con artist, she wanted to tell me all her secrets. It was a proud moment for her to admit how she got away with this. She had other felonies too. She had to go back to prison because of the airline thing.
Yeah, I had one that, as I said, enjoyed. He would con people, like, at hotels. He would have a card to say, like, I'm making this part up, like Pepsi Cola representative. And he would come into the lobby and he would say, Pepsi would like to have the hotel being used. We expect about 250 guests. They'll be staying here. And can you show me the rooms? Can you show me your banquet facility? And he even had a answering service that he paid, I think, in those days, like $20 a month to say Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola representative, whatever it was. And they would comp him. They say, no, why don't you stay here? We want you to see how great this place is. We want you to have 3 meals. And they catered to him. And he was phony. But he thought it was really funny that they were so stupid and listened to him.
Con artists, I'm telling you, can't trust strangers these days. You've heard about like the DARE program. There is evidence that when DARE is presented in school and fast forward 5 years, the kids are still using drugs. Like, there needs to be more research into what preventative measures really work and which ones don't work, and showing kids more positive things. Nobody asked me this, but I'll volunteer this. The saddest part of my job with juvenile delinquents is in 2 hours, some of them want me to be a surrogate dad for them. That's how lonely and sad their lives are. Like, when I get out of this place or get out of there, can we go to a movie? Like, that's sad, don't you think? So I wish there was more out there to not only show them what a life without crime could be like, but to give them some hope that, yes, if you can do X, Y, and Z, you could have a good job. You could be living on your own. These teenage boys like cars. You could be driving your own car. So I think there needs to be more programs like that. But how do you measure the success? I think that's something that really needs to be looked into a little bit more, because when we see programs like DARE, and then we see like, oh, wait a minute, kids who went through DARE still end up using drugs 5 years later, there needs to be something more concrete and specific with outcomes to kind of prove what is working and isn't working. But giving these kids hope, to me, especially in these poor neighborhoods, is the most important thing.
I think also teaching them job skills, because when I used to do the juvenile court work, too, I would say, what are you going to do when you get older? And they'd say, I'm going to get a good job. And I would say, that pays well. And I would say, what kind of job would that be? Oh, I don't know, just as long as it pays well. So if somebody learned auto mechanics, if somebody learned any kind of cement work and so forth, I think that would help to some degree. They would have some money, they would have some peer group and so forth, and some status. But I don't think it would cure everything, but it would help.
What would you say is like the biggest common factor in all of the children you've seen?
The kids that I see, hopelessness, where their lives they don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. It just doesn't seem like it's ever going to get any better. I can't tell you how many kids have said that, and honestly, I think a lot of times they're right. When I look at their lives, anybody see the movie, gosh, it's been over 10 years now, The Blind Side, about football? One time I'm leaving. This kid is supposed to come to probation to see me. He's 45 minutes late. I'm packing up my stuff and leaving. This enormous teenager walks through the door, and I'm like, are you so-and-so? I said his name, and he goes, yeah. You were supposed to be here nearly an hour ago. And he goes, I'm sorry, sir, I had to take 3 different buses. I said, where are your parents? I haven't seen him in weeks, living at home by himself at 15 years old, even though he looked like a grown-up adult. I mean, hopeless, sad. That is the toughest part of what I do with these juveniles. A lot of them have lives like that.
And being in groups of gangs and so forth in the neighborhood where the only way to get recognition is to do some criminal activity. So
yeah, and that becomes their family, is their gang. Thank you so much. You guys have been such a great audience.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.